The collar came off, in front of 500 wolves. No announcement, no herald stepping forward with a scroll, no ceremony prepared, or words rehearsed for the High Elder to record in the kingdom's ledgers. He simply moved. He crossed the grand ballroom floor, black marble gleaming beneath the blazing chandeliers, and he did not stop until he was standing directly in front of her. She was where she always was, against the far wall, hands folded at her waist. Eyes down. The silver collar at her throat caught the chandelier light and threw it back across the marble in thin, cold arcs, and every wolf in that room felt the air change before they understood why. He reached up and unclasped it himself. His fingers did not hesitate, did not fumble. The clasp opened in one motion, the way a man opens something he has thought about opening for a very long time. He held it in his closed fist for just a moment, the weight of it small and wrong for something that had defined 6 years of a person's life. Then he turned and set it on the silver tray of the nearest footman, without ceremony, without significance, the way you set down something that no longer belongs to anyone. The room did not breathe. 500 wolves, council lords and pack nobles and ceremonial guards and servants, pressed to the edges of the room, and not one of them moved. Not one of them made a sound. Because what happened next was not something any of them had prepared for. She looked up at him, not in gratitude, not in the performance of relief the room was waiting for. Those gray eyes met his gold ones without flinching, without softening, without giving him anything he had not already earned. She looked at him, the way a person looks at someone they have been watching for a very long time and have finally decided to trust, and she whispered something. Something so quiet that in a room full of wolves with their preternatural hearing, only one of them was close enough to catch it. His knees hit the marble floor before he understood he had moved. This is the story of Saren Vance, last daughter of a fallen house, collared at 15 years of age and auctioned to the royal palace as a bondservant when her family's debts came due and the men who had manufactured those debts came to collect. She had worn the silver for 6 years. 6 years of learning to move through grand corridors without making a sound, to fold silk sheets that were worth more than her freedom, to keep her eyes down and her voice quiet and her survival instincts sharp beneath the performance of invisibility. She had learned to be invisible the way some people learn to breathe, not because it was natural but because the alternative was worse. And the part that changed everything did not happen the night the Alpha King removed her collar. It happened 3 weeks earlier, in the hour before dawn, in a corridor she was never supposed to be in. It happened when the most powerful wolf in the realm turned from a stone wall, with grief still visible on his face, and looked at her as though she were the only fixed point in a world that had come loose from its foundations. She had not known what to do with that look. For 3 weeks she had carried it, turned it over in her mind during the cold, dark hours when the palace slept, and she was supposed to be sleeping too. She had examined it for threat, the way she examined everything. She had searched it for calculation, for manipulation, for the particular cruelty that sometimes wears the face of honesty. She found none of those things. That was the part she could not solve. The corridor was called the King's Walk. A long passage running behind the throne room, used only by palace staff in the hours between midnight and dawn when the court had emptied and the banquet floors needed attention. Saren had been carrying a pitcher of warm water toward the physician's annex, a simple errand, the kind she had performed hundreds of times. She was not supposed to see anything that night. She saw everything. He was at the far end of the corridor with his back to her, both hands pressed flat against the stone wall, his forehead resting between them, and his shoulders were doing something she had never once seen a powerful man's shoulders do. They were shaking. She stopped walking. The pitcher suddenly felt very heavy in her hands. Every instinct she had developed over 6 years of careful survival was speaking at once. A rapid and efficient assessment of the situation. The servant's door was 12 feet to her left. If she moved slowly enough, if she placed her steps carefully enough on the stone floor, she might reach it without him knowing she had been there at all. She did not move slowly enough. He turned. For a long moment neither of them made a sound. The corridor was cold. The candle sconces at the far end guttered in some draught that moved through the palace walls even in the stillness of deep night. She was calculating with the speed and precision of someone who had been calculating her own safety for 6 consecutive years, whether the guards would hear her footsteps if she ran, whether a bondservant who had witnessed a king's private grief would find herself reassigned to the eastern border outpost by morning, whether there was any version of this moment that ended with her situation unchanged. She could not find one. He spoke first. His voice was low and roughened at the edges, nothing like the voice she had heard from the gallery above the throne room, the voice that could silence 500 wolves with a single word. This voice was just a man's voice. She had not expected that. He said she was the one they called the quiet one. She kept her eyes at the level of his chest. Survival habits do not stop for unexpected moments. She told him she was called many things. He said most of them were not true. He pushed off the wall and turned to face her, fully. Even at a distance of 20 feet, he was too much. Too broad across the shoulders. The gold of his eyes, catching the candlelight in the dark corridor and making it look like something lit from inside. He asked which ones were true. He did not ask it like a question. He said it the way he said everything, with the particular certainty of a man who believed the answer already existed, and he was simply waiting for its location to be confirmed. She told him the quiet one was accurate. Something shifted at the corner of his mouth. Not a smile. Something more worn than that. Something that had once been a smile, and had been a long time without practice. He said that meant she already knew how to keep a secret. She looked up at him then. She could not help it. The moment required something from her she could not calculate out of. She met his eyes and told him that everyone wearing a collar knew how to keep a secret, that they learned it before they learned anything else. He held her gaze. The corridor between them felt both very long and very short. The candles at the far end steadied again and threw their small light across the stone. He asked her name. She told him. Saren Vance. The name landed in the cold air of that corridor and settled there. She watched him absorb it, watched the quality of his attention sharpen at the edges, the way gold sharpens when it is tested. The Vance name had been removed from the kingdom's rolls of standing nobility 15 years earlier. Her father's debts, her uncle's recorded treason. The slow and deliberate dismantling of a house that had once held an honored seat at this very court. All of that history moved across his expression in the space of 2 seconds. He told her she should go, before someone found her there. She went. She did not sleep that night. Bridge, Huck, Bridge. You are wondering whether she told anyone what she had seen. Whether she took the image of a king, pressing his grief into a stone wall, and used it the way a careful person would use something that valuable. A woman who has survived 6 years in a collar has learned to identify leverage. You are wondering whether that night became a bargaining chip. Here is what she did with it. Nothing. What? Because Saren Vance had understood something at 15 years of age that most people spend their entire lives failing to grasp. Power does not belong to the person who holds the secret. Power belongs to the person who does not spend it. The moment you use what you know, you are left with nothing but the memory of having used it. And she had spent 6 years accumulating silence the way other women in that palace accumulated necklaces and position and the small advantages that come from catching the right eye at the right moment. She kept what she had seen in that corridor, the way she kept everything that mattered, quietly, without anyone knowing it was there. But 3 days later, the Alpha King came to find her. And that changed everything she thought she understood about patience. He found her in the linen rooms on the palace's lower level. A long room with shelving along 3 walls and a stone floor that was always colder than the rest of the palace. She was refolding silk sheets that did not need to be refolded, her hands moving through the familiar rhythm of the task, because work was the only thing she had ever fully trusted to keep her thoughts from becoming dangerous. She heard him before she saw him. It was not a sound exactly, It was a change in the character of the air in the corridor outside, a quality of attention moving toward the room, the way a front of cold weather moves before it arrives. She did not turn around. He said from the doorway that she was not surprised. She said she was not. He said that most people were surprised when he sought them out. She set the last folded sheet on the shelf and turned. He was dressed plainly. No ceremonial chain, no formal coat. The guards, she knew, were somewhere nearby, were not visible. He looked like a man who had come somewhere specific for a reason he had decided on some time ago. She told him she imagined most people had not spent 6 years learning to understand where power moves before it announces itself. He stepped into the room. The room became his room the moment he entered it, the way all spaces became his, not through any effort on his part, but through some quality of presence that she had never been able to name precisely. He told her he had come to offer her something, a different position within the palace. Assistant to the royal archivist, her own chamber on the scholars' corridor. No more midnight scrubbing assignments. She studied him. She asked what it was in exchange for. He said for nothing. She said that was not how things worked. He said that was not how things had worked, and that this was not the same statement. Comment CTA. Before we go any further, I want to ask you something. If you were Saren in that moment, standing in a cold linen room with the most powerful wolf in the realm offering you something that looked like freedom, would you take it? Or would you walk away? Tell me in the comments right now. She did not take it. Not that day. Not because she believed he was lying. She had been watching him for 3 days since the corridor, and she had not found evidence of the kind of calculation that produces false generosity. But 6 years of careful survival had taught her that the most dangerous moment in any negotiation was not the moment of threat. It was the moment when you started wanting something. Wanting made you reach, reaching made you make mistakes. And Saren had not come this far. By reaching, she went back to her own section. She continued her own work. She neither avoided him nor sought him out. She waited to see what he would do with a no that had not been spoken. What he did was send books. They appeared on the small wooden shelf beside her sleeping pallet over the following 2 weeks, 3 at a time, with no note and no explanation. Old books, histories of the kingdom's founding, chronicles of the 7 original pacts and the bloodlines that had governed the territories since before anyone now living had been born. She read them. She could not read them. Books were the one thing she had never been able to be sensible about. The third delivery included a volume whose worn spine she recognized from a description she had heard once from her mother, a long time ago before everything. A genealogy of the noble houses of Valdoria, 4th edition. She opened it to the section where her family's history should have been recorded. Someone had written in the outer margin of that page, in a hand she did not know. Small, precise letters that had been placed there with great care. The writing said that the record was incomplete, that the truth of House Vance had been more complicated than what the official record allowed. She sat on the cold floor of her small chamber and read that sentence until the candle burned low. In the morning, she sent the books back. She included a note of her own, written on the inside of a torn piece of inventory parchment. She asked why the incomplete version was the one that had cost her family everything. He replied within the hour. Not in writing. He appeared in person in the archivist's main hall where she was cataloging a collection of territorial maps alongside 2 other bondservants. He walked through the door without preamble, without announcement, and he said directly into the quiet of that working room that it was because someone had wanted it that way, and that he had only recently begun to understand who. The 2 bondservants on either side of her dropped what they were holding. The maps they had been handling unrolled across the stone floor, with a sound like a collective exhale. Saren did not drop anything. She looked at him. She asked what he intended to do now that he understood it. He said he intended to do something about it. He looked at her collar then. Just briefly. His gaze moved to it, and away again, back to her eyes. He said if she would let him. She did not let him, not immediately. This was not quite the same as refusing. She was holding the space between agreement and refusal, very carefully, the way you hold something fragile. Because the most dangerous thing was not that she did not believe him, it was that she was beginning to. She was beginning to believe in him the way you believe in the approach of spring after a very long winter. Not loudly, not with certainty, just as a change in the quality of the light that you notice before you are willing to name it. But the bond had already begun doing something that she had not planned for. It started 3 nights after his appearance in the archivist's hall. She woke from a dream she could not hold on to, one of those dreams that dissolves the moment you surface from it and leaves only a feeling behind. The feeling she woke with was not hers. She knew the difference. She had catalogued her own feelings for 6 years, with the same efficiency she applied to everything else. She knew the particular texture of her own anxiety, and her own grief, and her own quiet anger at the life she had been handed. What she felt when she pressed her hand flat to her chest in the dark of her small chamber was none of those things. It was his. The particular quality of dread that belongs to someone who has been managing a catastrophe for so long that the management of it has become indistinguishable from the thing itself. The dread of someone who has been holding something very heavy for so long that he has stopped believing he could ever set it down. She lay still in the dark and felt it moving through the unfamiliar channel between them. She examined it the way she examined everything, trying to determine direction, trying to understand the edges of it. She did not go to him that night. But she understood, lying in that small, cold chamber, with his grief moving through her chest like a tide she had not invited, that the distance between them had become porous in a way she had not consented to and could not reverse. In the morning she went to find the beta. His name was Aldrich Silver, threaded through dark hair that had once been entirely dark, a face that had seen enough of the world to stop having to perform steadiness and simply be steady. She found him in the training yard, running drills with a group of younger palace warriors, and he stopped the moment he saw her, coming through the gate, dismissed the warriors with a single glance, and waited. She told him something was happening between the king and herself. She said she needed to understand what it was. Aldrich was quiet for a moment, not the silence of someone choosing words carefully for a political reason. The silence of someone thinking. Then he asked if she had felt it in her chest, an awareness of the king when he was not in the room, a weight to it, specific rather than general, a direction. She said yes to all of it. He nodded, slowly. He told her she already knew what it was, that she was hoping he would tell her it was something else. She told him what she was hoping was that it would go away. He said it would not. He said it without apology, without softening, the way a person says something they know is difficult, and have decided that kindness in this case means not pretending otherwise. He said it would deepen, that the longer it went unacknowledged between them, the harder it would pull. She looked away from him, at the stone walls of the training yard, at the pale winter sky, pressing down over the palace ramparts. She said the obvious thing because it needed to be said aloud. He was the Alpha King. She was wearing a collar with his house crest cut into the silver. Aldrich said he was not suggesting anything. He said he was confirming what the bond was already telling her. He said the king had known since the corridor. That he had been making deliberate space for her to arrive at it herself, without being commanded or pressured or cornered into it. She said that was not enough. He agreed. He said it plainly and without argument. But that it was a beginning. R.E. Hook Bridge. Here is what you need to understand about what was happening in the upper levels of the palace at the exact same moment. Saren was standing in that training yard, talking to Aldrich. The Council of 7 had been holding closed sessions every 3rd morning for 6 consecutive weeks. Lord Aldrin of the Northern Pack had been presenting what he called evidence to the assembled council. Signed testimonies from palace staff willing to attest to observed behavior. The case he was building had a very specific shape. He was arguing that the Alpha King's judgment had become compromised. That a king who sought out bondservants in private corridors after midnight, who sent restricted genealogical records to a collared woman from a disgraced house, who was seen speaking to that woman in the archivist's hall in front of witnesses, He had not used the word omega directly in those sessions. He had not needed to. The architecture of the argument was clear without it, and the trap had a specific mechanism. The winter solstice court, the grand claiming ceremony, the occasion on which the Alpha King was, by long tradition, expected to stand before the assembled packs and name his chosen mate. If he arrived at that ceremony without a mate named, Aldrin had enough council votes to initiate a fitness inquiry. Not just a hearing, an inquiry with the power to strip a king of authority pending review. There was a prophecy Aldrin knew about, a seer who had come to the king's father's court 28 years earlier. The prophecy was specific about the timeline. Aldrin had been waiting for this window for years. Saren did not know any of this, yet she was about to find out, and the way she found out was going to change every decision she had made about what it meant to protect herself. She found the documents by accident. Looking for things beyond the immediate demands of her work was not something she allowed herself. Looking for things was how you found out about things. You then had to decide what to do with, and she had enough of those already. She was in the archivist's main hall, running a stock count of the eastern shelving section, when a sealed scroll case shifted on the shelf above her, struck the edge of the cataloging table as it fell, and split open across the stone floor. She looked down at the scattered documents. Council session minutes, stamped with the official seals of the 7-pack territories, dated consecutively across 6 sessions. She recognized the format because she had spent months in this hall cataloging administrative records. She knew she should put them back into the damaged case and report the accident to the senior archivist in the morning. She knew this information had nothing to do with her. She knew that a bondservant who involved herself in council politics was a bondservant who would find herself somewhere significantly worse than the palace archivist's hall before the week was out. She read she read everything, quickly and completely, filing each piece as she went in the part of her mind that had been efficiently cataloging survival-relevant information since she was 15 years old. When she reached the end of the final session's minutes, she sat on the cold floor for a moment and processed what she had just learned. Then she went to find him. She had never entered the throne room. In 6 years she had been in every corridor, every lower hall, every annex and linen room and servants' passage in this palace, but she had never had cause to go through the throne room doors. The guards at those doors let her through without question when she arrived, which told her something she stored away without examining. Yet he was standing at the tall window beside the iron throne, his back to the room, looking out over the palace gardens below, which in deep winter were all stone and bare branches and the silver white of frost. She stopped 30 feet from him and told him there was a trap. She said it clearly. Lord Aldrin. The solstice ceremony. He had 2 weeks. He turned slowly. His expression did not change in the way most people's expressions change when surprised. It adjusted the way something very controlled adjusts when it receives significant information. A particular quality of attention moved behind his eyes, sharpening and focusing. He asked how she knew. She told him. The council minutes, the damaged seal on the case. She said she did not believe the scroll case had fallen by accident. He confirmed it had not. He said Aldrin had been testing whether he had informants in the archive. He said quietly that Aldrin had not expected his informants to have informants of their own. She told him not to make it about cleverness. She asked what he was going to do. He looked at her for a long moment. The gold of his eyes was very steady. He said he was going to do what he should have done 3 weeks earlier. She told him that was not an answer. He said it was, that she simply did not have enough context yet to recognize it as one. She took 3 steps toward him and stopped, because closing the distance between them was not an unconscious act, and she needed him to see that. She needed him to understand that she was choosing every inch of it deliberately. She told him that she had found this information and come directly to him, that she had not told anyone else, that she had not needed to do any of it. She told him that whatever was happening between them, she would rather it happen openly than have it turned into leverage by someone who did not deserve access to it. She asked him to give her the context. He crossed the remaining distance in 4 steps. He stopped close enough that she could feel the warmth coming off him in the cold throne room air. He was looking at her the way he had looked at her in the corridor, as though she were the only thing in the room that was not moving. He told her about the seer who had come to his father's court 28 years ago, the prophecy she had delivered. The blackmail line ending with him unless he found his fated mate before his 30th year, ending at the winter solstice. Aldrin, knowing both the prophecy and the empty space where a named mate should have been. She absorbed all of that. Then she asked the question that had been waiting underneath everything since the corridor. She asked if he had found his fated mate. The silence between them was not long. But it was the kind of silence that does not need length to communicate everything it contains. He said her name. Just that. Saren. He said it the way you say the name of something irreplaceable. The way you say a word that you have been careful with, because you understood from the beginning what it would cost. She took a step back. She told him not to say it like that while she was still wearing the collar. She said not like this, not with the collar still there and Aldrin 2 weeks from bringing everything down, because if the timing was a trap, then none of it meant what it needed to mean. He said to let him take it off. She said, not like this. He went very still. The kind of still that she had come to understand was not the absence of feeling but its opposite. Everything held with tremendous deliberate care. He said to tell him what she needed, and he would do it. She looked at him for a long time. She looked at the gold of his eyes, at the set of his jaw, at his hands, which were closed at his sides, in the manner of someone restraining something that does not want to be restrained, not from anger, but from everything that was not anger. From the particular effort of a man who had spent his entire life learning to be the most dangerous thing in any room, and was now trying very hard to be something else entirely in this one. She told him what she needed. She needed to know it was real, not political, not strategic, not a response to a prophecy his father had recorded and a council lord was weaponizing. She needed to know that if every external pressure were removed, if there were no deadline, and no trap, and no collar, and no winter solstice, he would still be standing in this cold throne room saying her name as though it cost him something to say it. He reached up and touched her face. Nothing elaborate. One hand, his palm against her jaw, his thumb at the outer edge of her cheekbone. Barely any pressure at all. And through the bond, through the channel between them that had been building in silence for weeks, she felt what that touch felt like from inside him. She felt it with a completeness that made every careful wall she had constructed, every calculated decision about wanting and safety and the management of hope, dissolve into something she could not build an argument against. He would, she believed him. She did not let him take the collar off that night, because there was work to do. She took the scroll case back to the archivist's hall and replaced the documents carefully inside it. She was back in her chamber before the palace began to stir for the morning. When Aldrich found her at her regular workstation 4 hours later, she had already mapped in her head every piece of information the council minutes had contained and identified the places where the trap could be dismantled. She told Aldrich everything, all of it, the session minutes, the vote counts, the mechanism. She watched him absorb it with the same steady efficiency she had come to expect from him. Then together, over 4 days, they identified which 2 council votes Aldrin had not yet secured. She was the one who went to Lord Emron of the Eastern Territories. She did it alone. She had thought about asking Aldrich to accompany her. She decided against it because an approach made through an intermediary was an approach that could be questioned, and she did not have the standing for her case to survive questioning. She went as herself. A bondservant in a silver collar with her family name, officially absent from the kingdom's records, walking through the morning market route that Emran's household took twice weekly past the palace's south gardens, and she stopped him plainly. She did not perform anything. She did not negotiate. She told him the truth in the same direct way she had been learning to speak since the corridor. She told him the Alpha King had a fated mate, that the bond recognized it, that the mate's family had been removed from the kingdom's records under circumstances that the official documentation did not accurately represent, that Aldrin's proposed fitness inquiry was not designed to counsel a king. It was designed to create the conditions for removing a bloodline, and the candidate waiting behind Aldrin's ambition would be sitting on the Iron Throne within a generation. Emran listened. He asked one question. He asked if the circumstances around the family's removal from the records could be proved. She told him she could show him 4 specific documents. If someone with his level of authorized access requested them through the restricted archive, he requested them the following morning. The documents were worse than what she had told him. They established clearly that the so-called treason attributed to her uncle had been constructed through a deliberate, coordinated effort among a political coalition that had included Aldrin's own father as a principal architect. The Vance family had not been removed from standing because of what they had done. They had been removed because of what they had known. And because someone with enough influence had decided it was safer to manufacture a reason than to let them keep knowing it. Lord Emran brought Lord Casson of the southern border into the discussion entirely without prompting. The trap Aldrin had been building for years became a question. The question reached the votes it needed. When Aldrin called the fitness inquiry at the Winter Solstice Court, the vote failed 4-3. The ceremony began at sundown. Saren watched from the servants' gallery above the grand ballroom. There was a gap in the silver damask drapes that had existed for years, used by generations of palace staff to observe events below without being observed themselves. She stood at that gap and watched the ballroom fill, 500 wolves taking their places on the black marble floor, pack lords in their ceremonial colors, noble houses arranged with the careful awareness of proximity that characterized political gatherings in this palace, the High Elder moving to his position at the dais. The ceremonial torches along the walls throwing their amber light against the silver filigree, and the moonstone panels in the black marble that reflected everything back doubled. She watched Lord Aldrin arrive. He was composed, controlled. His eyes moved through the room with the systematic assessment of a man who always had a second strategy ready. Then the ballroom doors at the far end opened. He walked in alone. No ceremonial escort, no herald. No council retinue moving behind him to signal the weight of the occasion, just him, crossing the ballroom floor with the same quality of movement he brought to every space he occupied, not hurried, not performing. Moving with the particular authority of someone who has never needed to announce himself, he crossed the entire length of the room. He stopped at the far wall. He looked directly at the gap in the silver damask drapes where she was standing. She felt it through the bond before she understood what he was about to do. 3 seconds, maybe 4, the tide of it moving through the channel between them, with a direction and a weight that was unmistakable. He was not asking, but he was waiting. She came down from the servants' gallery. She came through the narrow side corridor and through the servants' entrance at the edge of the ballroom floor, and she stepped out onto the black marble, and she crossed it. 500 wolves went completely still. She stopped in front of him. He reached up and unclasped the collar. One motion. He turned and set it on the footman's tray without looking away from her. The room held its breath. She looked back at him, gray eyes to gold. Nothing hidden, nothing performed. She said what she had been carrying since the night in the linen room when she had understood for the first time what the bond was trying to tell her. In a voice low enough that it crossed only the space between them, he knelt. Not from weakness, not from ceremony, not for 500 witnesses on a black marble floor in the most formal room in the kingdom. He knelt from something that had nothing to do with any of that, from something that had been true before either of them had been willing to call it true. What she had whispered was this: "You were already kneeling. You just did not know it yet." Because she had felt it for weeks, through every book that appeared on her shelf with no note attached, through every careful approach and every space deliberately made and every moment he had held the wolf back and waited for her to arrive on her own terms. She had felt him bending toward her, the way something ancient and certain bends toward what it has always been moving toward. Not dramatically, not suddenly. With the slow and total inevitability of something that was going to be true, regardless of whether either of them had the courage to say so. He had not needed her to free him. He had been freeing her for weeks, quietly and consistently, and without requiring anything in return. She had been simply naming what had already happened. He rose from the marble floor. He took her hand. And through the bond, the completion moved between them. Not violent, not the lightning strike she had heard described in the stories bondservants whispered to each other in the linen rooms during quiet hours. Something slower and more total than that. Two currents finding each other and becoming a single thing, without drama, without any remaining question about direction. He said her name. He said it aloud, so that the full room heard it. Saren Vance. He said it in the voice that could silence a room of 500 wolves. And he said it, the way you say the name of something you intend to protect. Her name. The name she had worn like a wound for 15 years. The name that had been absent from the kingdom's official records, spoken by the Alpha King on the floor of the grand ballroom, in a voice that made it sound like a title that had always been hers. He said his fated mate, his queen. Lord Aldrin left the room. She noticed. She let it go. Aldrin was tomorrow's work, and the day after that, and whatever came after that, and she would deal with all of it, but not tonight. The High Elder cleared his throat and began the formal words. She had heard these words before, whispered between bondservants in the dark hours, passed along in fragments like contraband, the words of the claiming ceremony that belonged to other people, to people whose names were still attached to records. She listened to them. Now she said her part, he said his. The old language of the kingdom moved through the cold air of the grand ballroom and sealed itself into the bond between them, witnessed by 500 wolves and by whatever older thing had been watching all along. When it was done, he leaned forward until his forehead rested against hers, and through the bond she felt what he was not saying, aloud, the depth of it, the steadiness, the particular relief of someone who has been carrying something very heavy for a very long time, who has finally been given permission to set it down, and who has discovered in that moment that his hands remember what they felt like, empty. She said quietly, just for him, that the collar had left a mark, that it always would. He said yes. He did not look away from her. He said so would this. She stood in the middle of the grand ballroom and looked around her. The black marble, the silver filigree walls, the 500 wolves who were already beginning to understand that the politics of the next several years had just changed entirely, that a queen from a fallen house, with no current title and no pack standing and no political weight, had just been named on the ballroom floor, and that every assumption they had walked in with tonight needed reconsidering. She found that she was not afraid of a single one of them. He was still holding her hand. She said they had a great deal of work ahead of them. He agreed they did. She said, starting with the restricted archive documents, the ones that accurately described what had happened to her family. He told her those documents had already been moved to the royal record, that her family name had been officially restored, that the restoration order had been signed that morning. She absorbed this, the thing she had stopped letting herself want at 15, because wanting it was a wound that never closed, and she had needed all her resources for other things. The name, the record corrected, the manufactured history replaced with the actual one, all of it done before the ceremony, before she had said yes to anything. She said he had done that before the ceremony. He said he had done it before he had ever asked her for anything. She stood in the light of the chandeliers, with his bond steady in her chest, and his hand warm around hers, and her name back in the record where it had always belonged, and she was quiet for a moment, just quiet, just present in the room, without calculating anything. She breathed. For the first time in 6 years, Saren Vance breathed, without measuring what the next breath needed to accomplish. There was no exit she was looking for, she was already exactly where she was going to be.